Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to episode 6 of the Ashra Mubashara series. My name is A.Qadri, and today we'll be talking about the life and key incidents of Zubair ibn Awam radiallahu anhu. In the last episode, I mentioned that there is a name that is always associated with Talha radiallahu anhu, and that is the name of Zubair ibn Awam radiallahu anhu. The first reason they are always mentioned together is that Zubair radiallahu anhu was related to Talha radiallahu anhu. Zubair radiallahu anhu was the son of Al-Awam ibn Khawalid, who was the brother of Nawfal Khawalid, who, if you remember, I mentioned in the last episode. He was the brother of Khadija radiallahu anha, and was the same man who tortured Talha radiallahu anhu. His mother's name was Safiya radiallahu anha, who was the aunt of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, making him the first cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the seventh person to accept Islam. He was around 12 to 15 years old when he accepted Islam, and accepted Islam the day after Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Prophet ﷺ used to say that every prophet had disciples, and that his disciple was Zubair radiallahu anhu. His uncle Nawfal used to torture him by wrapping him in a mat every day and suffocating him with smoke. Every night, Makkans could hear his screams because he was tortured for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen. Zubair, Ali, and Talha radiallahu anhuma were the trio of children who were surrounding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Zubair radiallahu anhu had a special courage at the young age of 15. He faced all the persecution bravely and courageously. Once he came to know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was attacked, so he took his sword and ran to defend him. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him what he was doing with a sword. So Zubair radiallahu anhu replied that he came out to protect him and will strike anyone who is trying to attack the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Scholars say that this was the first sword drawn for fi sabilillah, meaning in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Meccan era, Muslims were bearing this persecution and were not commanded to fight back. So this young boy, Zubair radiallahu anhu, our hero of today, his main trait to be marked is his courage and bravery. He was one of the first to migrate to Abyssinia, amongst the youngest ones there, and again we have another incident of his bravery. So what happened was that Abyssinia was facing an enemy who was trying to overthrow their king, the Negus, who was a very kind-hearted king and who gave refuge to all the Muslims coming in from Mecca. Negus and his army had to cross the Nile to fight the enemy, so no one from the Muslims knew what was going on in the battle and were scared for their future in Abyssinia if the Negus was to lose the battle. So the Muslims decided that someone should swim across the Nile River and bring news of the battle. So Zubair radiallahu anhu, this young boy, volunteered to swim across the Nile River. He swam across and came back and gave the news of the Negus' victory. This shows his immense bravery. Just to point out, the Nile River is 2.8 kilometers wide, so swimming there and back, he swam 5.6 kilometers in total. Moving on to his marriage, he was married to Asma bint Abu Bakr radiallahu anha. And if you remember in the last episode, I told you about Talha radiallahu anhu, who was also married to one of the daughters of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So they weren't only best friends, they were also brothers-in-law. There were only three people who announced their migration to Medina, and they were Umar radiallahu anhu, Hamza radiallahu anhu, who was the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Zubair radiallahu anhu. These three were the bravest. After 3 months of migration, Zubair radiallahu anhu and Asma radiallahu anha had their first child named Abdullah bin Zubair radiallahu anhu, who is a renowned companion. His second son, who is also a renowned companion, is Urwa bin Zubair radiallahu anhu. Moving on to the Battle of Badr and some incidents that occurred there. During the Battle of Badr, there were 313 Muslims facing 1,000 disbelievers from Mecca. The Muslims didn't have proper equipment to fight and had just 2 horses. One of these horsemen were Zubair radiallahu anhu, while the Quraysh, the enemy, had 300 horsemen. Zubair radiallahu anhu had a special talent, and this was fighting with 2 swords and controlling his horse with his legs. He showed this talent on the day of Badr. On that day, he was also wearing a yellow turban and fought so bravely that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him with what no man has been honored with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent 3,000 angels wearing yellow turbans, imitating and following Zubair radiallahu anhu. This is mentioned in Quran and Hadith. So imagine this young companion and his bravery that 3,000 angels followed in his dress. Moving on to the Battle of Uhud and another story of his bravery. There was a man named Talha ibn Abi Talha who was a disbeliever and not his best friend. He was a fierce warrior and had the best horse. Zubair radiallahu anhu went to duel with him. His mother, Safiya radiallahu anha, was worried that Zubair radiallahu anhu would be killed, so she went to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He smiled and replied, saying that Zubair radiallahu anhu will be victorious, and that is exactly what happened. He killed Talha ibn Abi Talha using Talha's own sword and brought Talha's sword and horse back to the Muslim army. He played a key role with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu against Musaylama Kazab, the false prophet. Likewise, he played an important role with Umar radiallahu anhu in some important conquests such as the conquest of Egypt, and also had a role during the caliphate of Osman radiallahu anhu. He had a strong love for Osman radiallahu anhu and wanted the blood of Osman radiallahu anhu to be avenged. So he was with Aisha radiallahu anha and was demanding that the killers of Osman radiallahu anhu be pursued. He went with Aisha radiallahu anha and his best friend Talha radiallahu anhu to Iraq to talk to Ali radiallahu anhu, who was the caliph at the time. At some point, he left for Medina alone because he had immense love for Ali radiallahu anhu and Aisha radiallahu anha, so he didn't want to take sides with either of them. As he was leaving, one of the Khawarij, meaning one of the new foreign Muslims, his name was Amr ibn Jarmus, requested to accompany him on his way back to Medina. So these two set off alone to Medina. During Asr's Salah, Amr ibn Jarmus, the Khawarij, attacked Zubair radiallahu anhu and mutilated him. He took his limbs and swords and took it to Ali radiallahu anhu, thinking he would be pleased. But Ali radiallahu anhu, on seeing him, cried so badly and yelled and said that he heard the Prophet ﷺ saying that if you see the killer of Ibn Safiya, meaning the son of Safiya, who is Zubair radiallahu anhu, give him the news of hellfire. Amr ibn Jarmus, upon hearing that, ran away and committed suicide. So it is a sad ending of his life, but there is something very significant here. Both his sons, Abdullah and Urwa radiallahu anhuma, died in their salah, and Zubair radiallahu anhu also died in his salah. This shows the courage, the bravery that he had because of his love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why he was taken back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he was closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salah is the act in which you are the most closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The lesson here is that are we brave and have courage to show our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our words and actions. Before I end this episode, as we go along this series, I would like to give you tips on how to remember all of these names of the Ashra Mubashara. So the best way to remember is the names of the first four caliphs, and then we have the two best friends, Talha and Zubair radiallahu anhuma. As we continue, I'll give you more tips for the next few companions. Jazakallah khair for joining me for this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.